Kendra has a maximum of $1,500 with which to purchase stocks, which means she could spend the whole $1,500 or she could spend less. She wanted to buy some shares of General Electric and some shares of Ford Motor Company. So she's buying shares from two different companies. Okay, General Electric was selling at approximately $16 a share and Ford at approximately $12 a share. What we want to do is write an inequality that expresses the quantity of each stock that she could buy. So quantity, that's the key word here. That means how many. So basically write an inequality that expresses how many shares of each stock she could buy, and then we're going to graph that inequality. And so what we're looking for is number of stocks. So that's what the word quantity means. Like I said, number of. So let's say X could represent number of shares of GE. So let's say X is number of GE shares. And Y could represent the unknown number of Ford shares. Now, let's think about what this inequality should look like. Well, the amount of money she spends can be up to $1,500. So let's say total amount of money spent. Well, that could be equal to $1,500. She could spend it all, or she could spend less. So the total amount of money spent should be less than or possibly equal to $1,500. Okay, so how much is she spending? Well, she's spending some money on GE and she's spending some money on Ford. Well, how much is she spending? Well, GE, General Electric, was selling at $16 a share. Okay, so if she bought one share, it would be $16. If she bought two shares, it would be 2 times 16. If she bought 3 shares, it would be 3 times 16. If she bought any number of shares, you take that number and times it by 16. So the number of shares that she's buying of GE, well, we don't know how many it is. We're calling it X. So she's buying X shares of GE. So she's spending $16 X number of times. So the amount of money she spends on GE would be 16 times X. That's the money spent on. So let's actually go one step before this in words. So money on GE plus the money on Ford should be less than or equal to $1,500. Okay, so the money she's spending on GE, that would be $16, 16 times the number of times that she's spending it, or the number of shares, so 16 times X. And the amount of money being spent on Ford, well, Ford, that we're given that in the problem, is $12 for every share. So that would be 12 times the number of shares of Ford, which is 12 times Y, should be less than or equal to 1,500. All right, so there's our inequality. Now we want to graph this. And in my previous video, we talked about the 4 different scenarios, or the 4 different ways you could graph an inequality, with a solid line shading above, with a solid line shading below, with a dashed line shading above, or a dashed line shading below. In this case, it will be a solid line because there's the or equal to, and we'll shade below that line because of the less than. Now, there's 2 ways of graphing a line. We could convert this equation to y equals mx plus b and use the slope and the y-intercept. That's one method that we've been discussing. Or we could find 2 points on the line. Remember, you need 2 points to graph a line. So let's find 2 points on the line, and the easiest points normally to find are the intercepts, because those are the points that have the numbers 0 in them. So basically we want the point, let's go back to blue. When x is 0, what is y equal to? And when y is equal to 0, what is x equal to? So those are the 2 points we want. So we could use this inequality. And if we plug in 0 for the x value, then we know that 16 times 0 is 0, so 12y should be equal to 1500. And similarly, if we plug in a 0 for the y value and find x, well, if we plug in 0 for y, that's 12 times 0, which is 0, so we would say 16x is equal to 1500. Okay, so on the left, we could solve for y by dividing both sides by 12. Okay, so we'll have y is equal to, and on the calculator, if you do 1500 divided by 12, you will get 125. So if we let x equal 0, then the y value is 125. So there's 1 point. 0 for x, 125 for y, so that looks like it's about right there. Halfway between 100 and 150. And then if we let the y value equal 0 and solve for x, then we would divide both sides of the equation by 16. And if you plug 1500 divided by 16 into the calculator, you will get 93.75. And so over here on our graph, here's 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. So 93.75 is somewhere around there. Okay, so those are the 2 points on the graph. Again, we're only using the first quadrant where x is positive and y is positive because we can't have a negative number of shares. You can't buy or purchase a negative number of something. Okay, so once we have our 2 points, we could draw the line. Remember, it's a solid line because of the or equal to in our inequality. And because of the less than part of the inequality, we shade below. So any pair of numbers, any point x comma y in this range would be a possible number of shares that she could buy. All right, so we've created our inequality and we have graphed it. That does it for this problem. I hope this was helpful.